Hello and welcome to Bits and Atoms, the Grisham Robotics Founder Series. I'm your host, Elias Can, and today I've got Andrea Matta, co-founder and CEO of Ideatura, joining me. To get started, Andrea, would you mind sharing a quick intro about you and Ideatura?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Elias. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast, I guess. I am Andrea. I'm an architect. I've been living in the UK for the past 15, 16 years. I did my studies here in London. That's where I live at the moment. And as an architect, I always had a little bit of an interest in startups as well, ever since like wrapping up my thesis, fundamentally, looking for a different path that wasn't just like architecture or working for a large design firm. But fundamentally, that's what I started after my studies. And I worked for some of the largest architectural firms here in the UK on very complex construction projects. And I fundamentally, over the years, saw the same problem over and over repeating, which was that like incredibly talented people were spending a huge amount of time on very repetitive, mundane tasks. One of those being the production of drawings within the construction industry. And I felt that that was becoming a very serious bottleneck. Instead of architects actually being able to work on designs, they were stuck on these repetitive workflows fundamentally. And at the same time, I started seeing like, well, that was 2 years ago with the advent of vibe coding, at least from my side, that I could actually start automating some of these tasks using fundamentally just natural language. That got me very excited about the topic. And that's what pushed me towards making the jump, going from an architect to a founder and actually start building Ideatura. Ideatura in itself, the problem that Ideatura wants to tackle at the moment is the automation of the production of drawings. Your plans, your sections, your elevations that you extract from a 3D model to document your project. That you can give to a builder and say, this is where we're placing my walls, this is the shape of my building, these are the distribution of spaces, etc. So that's the problem that we're initially targeting. As a product today, Ideatura is fundamentally a chat interface that bolts on top of your 3D modeling software. And the way you should think about it is kind of an AI layer that sits between the architect and the 3D modeling design software of their choice, and helps them bridge the gap between the ability of creating complex automations within their workflows with their inability to actually generate code themselves for that to work. So they can simply talk through our software, and our software has the technical ability to generate those automations and actually execute the work inside of the software. Hopefully that's good enough.
Amazing. Yeah, extremely comprehensive, and it gives me a good sense of why you wanted to become a founder. And I was curious about that tipping point, and you kind of brought it up with AI and vibe coding. Would you say for you originally to become a founder, like that was a key tipping point, and then maybe the amount of time you had spent in your career professionally already, like some kind of combination of the two was ultimately what led you to the founder route?
Yes. So I always felt that I was at the tipping point of wanting to do something like this. It's not necessarily easy. As an architect, I only knew architects at the time. So it was difficult for me to actually make the jump. But fortunately enough, I started doing a little bit of vibe coding myself. I expanded my network with actual technical people that are capable of building software. And obviously, those conversations between a non-technical person and from the domain expertise from construction industry and a technical person that didn't have that kind of connection, we saw some parallels in that particular space. And the tipping point, yes, was definitely the ability for an architect all of a sudden to start pushing their knowledge into a tool to fundamentally be able to create some technical output on the other side. In terms of like, yeah, I mean, this was in terms of actually why we decided to work on this particularly. I have spent countless hours, me and my peers, on actually creating this documentation. And by the way, drawings is the first problem that we're tackling, but potentially this can expand into many other areas of the workflows of an architect. But we saw that realistically, the design part of an architect is only maybe 20% of their time. And 80% could potentially be sped up or automated. Of this 100% that we have, we mapped that roughly 30% is actually purely spent on the creation of drawings and documentation. And look at it this way, for whether it's a small practice of 10 people or a large practice of 1,000 people, 30% of your workflow is just doing that, just production of drawings. That's an incredible bottleneck in terms of not just like profitability for the practice, but also like just pure creative output that is not being liberated.
Yeah, and that documentation workflow, are there kind of like legacy tools that folks are using today on that kind of 30% block of time? I'm sure maybe it's probably advanced beyond pen and paper, but in terms of like any
you'll
kind
be
of
surprised.
technology, yeah, maybe it is still mainly that. But yeah, how does that workflow look like inside of firms? What kind of tools do they use today? And when I say today, more of like the legacy tools that have been on the market for a bit.
Totally. Okay, so it wouldn't be fair for me to say that that hasn't changed at all. Obviously, there are like different parts of the market where the adoption of new technology, especially in the last couple of years, has been like drastically increasing. But historically, architects have been using just a few. I'll speak just for architects because the construction industry is a very broad sector, and I myself I can speak for one part of the market. Architects in themselves have been fairly slow at adopting new technologies for a variety of reasons. Okay, there are some. But fundamentally, those two pieces of software that are de facto standard in the industry are AutoCAD and Revit, both belonging to Autodesk as a company. Revit in itself was created, I think, in the early 2000s, and now we're in 2026. So you can appreciate that there's been like 20 plus revisions of that software, but not drastic improvements in the logic in which an architect will use those tools. Yeah, and fundamentally, we as a profession, we spend a huge amount of time creating this very complex 3D modeling. Some people like the basic terminology is CAD, computer-aided design, but like really what we're talking about is BIM, which stands for Building Information Modeling. It's fundamentally 3D geometry plus data. And when you're building the 3D model of your building, it's not just geometry, it's geometry that has semantic meaning. So a door, it knows that it is a door. It's not just a rectangular extrusion, so to speak. And we spend so much time actually putting all this information inside of these 3D models. The tragedy is that we spend an even bigger amount of time flattening this down into like dumb 2D drawings. And to a certain extent, the process of creating these drawings, it's partly automated already. You can extract your plans, your sections, and your elevations, but there is so much more that goes into actually creating fully compliant, precise, annotated drawings that actually only covers like a small sliver. And the problem with that is that today the tools that architects have to automate their workflow are fairly technical. There are things called, well, you can either just write your own automations in Python or in C#, or you might be able to use something called visual scripting, where you basically create a graph of interdependencies for certain automations to happen. The problem is that those automations, they tend to be incredibly rigid. Like they work in this beautiful scenario where everything is perfectly modeled, everything is perfectly documented and structured prior to the creation of those drawings. And unfortunately, that's never the case. So what we're trying to do here is instead of trying to have AI create rigid automations, we're trying to have AI actually being much more independent in its decisions. And an architect can fundamentally push their intent. So this is what I'm trying to achieve. And AI can fundamentally run on its own inside of the 3D modeling environment, look at the specific of the 3D model, understand the context. Am I doing drawings for a small house, or am I doing drawings for an enormous commercial project? And then making decisions based on my initial intent. So that's one fundamental difference between what we're doing and legacy stuff.
Yeah, interesting. And I would think too, because like you said, very rigid, but the semantic piece as well, that it understands better and better what you're doing based on the type of project it is itself as well can certainly change. Does for having the AI kind of like go off and run on its own for a bit as well, like are there still checks and balances where you need a human review? Are there some things that in the process can just be delegated to AI to say, you know, let it run how it wants to? It's less of like maybe like a liability or some kind of risk like that there isn't a human review? Or is it still pretty dependent that like a human will have to review the output no matter what? It's just that the AI can create much more effectively outside of those like rigid constraints that have been there.
So realistically, there is definitely still a human in the loop. Architecture in itself is a chartered profession, so the title is protected, and you're not supposed to just give away that control and that comes with you being a professional. So to a certain extent, we'll never take responsibility on that side. It's up to the architect to actually be sure that the output is correct. In the same way that I assume a lawyer could never simply say, "Oh, ChatGPT said so, so it's not my problem anymore." On the other hand, it really depends on the workflows. Yes, we are starting to see AI being actually fully independent. So the first step was you send a request, help me create some drawings or help me place some dimensions, and the tool will generate you an automation. Okay, we'll actually do code generation for you. Once we pass that stage, we started actually giving our AI a bunch of tools and skills to be more proficient in the context and faster on responding to you. And one of those tools is the ability to interrogate the model upon which you're creating automations for. And once you pass that stage, you start wondering, well, if the AI is actually creating that automation and then executing the automation, the next step will obviously, you want AI to check the output of that automation. You want AI to see if the results match your initial intent through screenshots, through recordings, through markups, and then push that feedback back in the loop, AI to look at it again and fundamentally update the automation or cancel the initial result. And you actually start creating this flywheel where AI can, on the basis of a simple prompt, fundamentally start running on its own.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny you brought up the legal example as well, because that, in my mind, that was kind of what I was thinking as well, as like a parallel example. I will say too, like there was a big US law firm recently that got caught using ChatGPT and in court cases. And so, people will still probably try and do it, but it's obviously you get your nose rubbed in it if you get caught and it doesn't turn out well typically.
Well, look, I think it's only fair that you must adopt these new technologies no matter what. You still have to have your own professional judgment of whether you think that the output is deemed good enough to be representative of your firm.
Yeah. And now compared to, because I know we've talked about the legacy, what that landscape looks like, and the step change improvement with AI in general as well. I guess for Ideatura, how do you kind of position versus other more modern AI competitors that have come into the market as well? What's kind of like the positioning there for you so far?
Right. Okay. So fundamentally, competition and differentiation of Ideatura.
Yep.
I think the main difference in this landscape of AI tools for design, they are popping up in every vertical, of course. There is competition in our space as well. We're not the only one building this. So first of all, that's a good sign. When you see competition, you see other people building in the same space, it kind of validates a little bit what you're doing. And the pull from the customer itself, that's also nice to see. They're like, oh, this is cool. This is actually interesting. Give me more. That's always nice. But yeah, so there are other people building in the space. Autodesk in itself is trying to build in this particular space their own AI layer on top of their 3D modeling tools. I think the main difference, like the real differentiator for us, is that what we're building, so today's tools, they tend to either be just what's the word? Inquisitive. They can extract information from the model. They don't really execute on top of it. And to make an even further example, the way you would want to do that is with geometry understanding. The main difference that I think we have with our competitors is that we are building spatial intelligence for our tool. AI is really good at like text and generating text and code, of course, but it's a completely different ballpark when you ask AI to actually understand 3D geometry and spaces. And that gap is where we are positioning ourselves at the moment. And that's why the other tools, maybe they can read the model, they can push some text-based parameters into it. We can actually, we started from dimensions. That was our first wedge in the process of creating drawings. You need to annotate your drawings, and you need to say how long and how thick is a wall, for example. That requires spatial intelligence. That was one of our first key decisions that we had that was gonna fundamentally give us a little bit of a moat in this hyper-accelerated space. And the ability for AI to understand geometry is really it's non-trivial. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point there too, with like that execution layer piece, because it can kind of understand and spit something out, but then it's a different game for it to actually take that output and do something actionable with it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's the same difference when someone asks ChatGPT to write an email and then you have to copy paste it and be sure, or actually allowing these new agentic workflows to do the job for you, really do the job for you. So you can kind of draw a parallel there between those kind of like more general agentic workflows and what we're doing inside of the construction industry and the architectural space.
Yep. Amazing. And we're at time here. I want to thank you again, Andrea, for joining me today on Bits and Atoms. It was great to have you. Very insightful conversation. I'll let you get back to building. It won't take any more of your time. And thanks again for joining me today.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm on back-to-back calls, either with you or with other with some of our clients. So it's all good. It was a pleasure.